Welcome back, everybody. We're diving deep today into a legal case, really making headlines around the world. We've got this 54-page indictment from a U.S. court, and wow, it reads like a John Grisham novel. Bribery, corruption, even some obstruction of justice, all wrapped up in this one. And it involves individuals connected to the Adani Group, one of India's biggest conglomerates.
Yeah, a really high-stakes situation, and these charges could have a huge impact on global business.
Right. And to help break it all down, because legalese isn't exactly our first language, we have expert speaker here.
Happy to be here. So the indictment outlines 5 different charges, counts in legal terms. Counts 1 and 5 are really the big ones, though. Conspiracy to violate the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act and obstruction of justice. Those are the ones with serious consequences.
Okay, so backing up for a sec, you mentioned the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. For those of us who aren't lawyers, what does that even mean?
Sure, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, or FCPA,
Yeah.
it's a U.S. law that essentially says American companies and individuals can't bribe foreign officials to get ahead in business. It's a pretty powerful tool to combat corruption internationally.
Makes sense. So who are we talking about here with these charges?
Well, that's where it gets interesting. While the case is linked to the Adani Group, Adani himself and his nephew are not named in those 2 big counts, 1 and 5.
Whoa, okay. So who I S-named then?
The indictment names for officers of the Adani Group and mentions a foreign party, too, but it doesn't get into specifics.
Wait, it doesn't name names. That seems a little strange.
It's definitely unusual,
Right.
and this lack of specifics in the indictment raises a lot of questions. It could make it much harder for the accused to defend themselves. Imagine trying to prepare a defense when you don't know who's accusing you or what they're accusing you of.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Like being told you're in trouble, but no one tells you what you did wrong. Talk about stressful.
Exactly. It also makes it tougher for the public to really understand what's going on. We're left with a lot of questions.
Okay, so let's dig into those questions then. The charge sheet mentions bribery of Indian officials related to power supply and purchase, but it doesn't say who was bribed, how they were bribed, or even what department they work for. It's like trying to solve a puzzle, but half the pieces are missing.
That's a great analogy. This lack of specifics could be a strategic move by the prosecution, though. Maybe hoping to pressure individuals into cooperating by keeping them in the dark.
Ooh, that's a good point. Like they're casting a wide net and seeing who they can catch. So what do you think this means for the Adani Group? Are they in serious trouble here?
Well, it's too early to say, for sure.
Yeah.
But this lack of clarity definitely puts them in a difficult position legally and from a public relations perspective.
Right. How do you reassure investors and the public when you don't even know what you're being accused of? This is going to be fascinating to watch unfold.
It's a real challenge for them. On one hand, they need to address these allegations head on. They can't just ignore them and hope they go away. But on the other hand, they need to be careful about what they say publicly. Anything they do say can be used against them in court.
It's like walking a tightrope. They need to defend themselves without incriminating themselves.
Exactly. And they need to do all of this while also trying to maintain the trust of their investors and the public. This is a high-stakes game of chess, and the Adani Group needs to make its moves carefully.
So what happens next in this legal saga? You mentioned that the indictment has been filed, but what does that mean in terms of the process?
Well, filing the indictment is just the first step. Now, the individuals named in the indictment, including those connected to the Adani Group, have the opportunity to respond to the charges.
So what does that look like? Do they have to go to court right away?
Not necessarily. They can challenge the allegations in a number of ways. They can file motions to dismiss the charges, argue that the court doesn't have jurisdiction, or even claim that the indictment itself is flawed.
So it's not like they're automatically guilty just because they've been indicted.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
In the U.S. legal system, you're presumed innocent until proven guilty. The indictment is simply a formal accusation. It's up to the prosecution to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt.
Got it. So it's a bit like a legal tug of war. The prosecution presents their evidence, the defense tries to poke holes in it, and the judge or jury ultimately decides who wins.
That's a great way to put it. And this whole process can take months, sometimes even years to play out. It's a marathon, not a sprint.
Wow, okay, so this is far from over. And while all this legal wrangling is going on, what about the impact on the Adani Group itself? These are some serious accusations. How are investors reacting?
Well, unsurprisingly, the markets don't like uncertainty. And this indictment has created a lot of it. The Adani Group's stock prices have taken a hit, and investor confidence has definitely been shaken.
Makes sense. I mean, if I had money invested in a company and suddenly they were facing accusations of bribery and corruption, I'd be pretty nervous too.
You and everyone else. And this goes beyond just the financial impact. The Adani Group's reputation has taken a blow. They're known for being a major player in infrastructure and energy projects, and those sectors rely heavily on public trust.
Right, if people start to question their integrity, it could have a ripple effect across their entire business.
Exactly. They're going to need to do some serious damage control to reassure investors and the public that they're taking these allegations seriously and that they're committed to operating ethically and transparently.
So what could that look like? What steps could they take to rebuild that trust?
Well, for starters, they need to be proactive in cooperating with the investigation. They need to hand over any relevant documents, make their employees available for questioning, and generally demonstrate that they have nothing to hide.
Transparency is key here, right?
Absolutely. They also need to be very careful about how they communicate with the public.
Yeah.
They need to be honest and forthcoming without saying anything that could jeopardize their legal defense. It's a delicate balance.
It sounds like they need to hire a whole team of lawyers and PR experts just to navigate this situation.
You're probably not wrong about that. But beyond the immediate crisis management, they also need to take a hard look at their internal controls and compliance procedures. They need to ask themselves how this happened in the first place and what steps they can take to prevent something like this from happening again.
That's a really important point. They need to show that they're not just trying to sweep this under the rug, but that they're actually committed to learning from this experience and making real changes.
Exactly. It's about more than just surviving this legal battle. It's about emerging from it stronger and more resilient.
This really highlights the importance of ethics and accountability, especially for large corporations operating on a global scale, doesn't it?
Without a doubt. In today's interconnected world, news travels fast, and any missteps can have far-reaching consequences. It's not just about protecting your bottom line. It's about protecting your reputation, your relationships, and ultimately your long-term sustainability.
This case really drives that point home. And it's a reminder that even powerful entities like the Adani Group aren't above the law. The legal process will play out, and the truth, whatever it may be, will eventually come to light.
I completely agree. And this case is far from over. It's a complex situation with a lot of moving parts, and it'll be fascinating to see how it all unfolds.
Okay, so we've talked about the charges, the potential legal strategies, the impact on the Adani Group, and the importance of ethics and accountability. But there's still one big question that's been hanging over this entire conversation.
You mean the lack of specifics in the indictment?
Exactly. We've danced around it, but we haven't really addressed it head on. Why do you think the indictment is so vague? Is it just sloppy legal work, or is there a strategic reason behind it?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And honestly, we can only speculate at this point. It's possible that the prosecution simply doesn't have all the details yet, and they're hoping to uncover more information as the investigation progresses.
So they're throwing a dart and hoping it hits the target.
Maybe. Or it could be a deliberate tactic to keep the accused off balance. The element of surprise can be a powerful tool in a legal battle.
I see what you mean. If you don't know what the prosecution knows, it's harder to prepare a defense. You're constantly looking over your shoulder, wondering what they're going to throw at you next.
Exactly. It creates a sense of unease and uncertainty, which can sometimes lead people to make mistakes.
So it's like a legal game of cat and mouse.
That's a great analogy. And in this game, the prosecution is definitely holding the cards.
Yeah, it's a real legal thriller. It's fascinating, but let's talk about what this means for Adani Group's future. Legally and for their reputation, what are the potential consequences?
Well, if individuals connected to the Adani Group are found guilty, the penalties could be really significant. We're talking huge fines, maybe even imprisonment. And for a company like Adani Group that relies so much on its reputation for integrity, the damage goes way beyond financial penalties.
You're talking about their relationships with investors, governments, and the public, right?
Exactly. This kind of scandal can destroy trust, and it takes years to rebuild that. It can also make it much harder to secure contracts and partnerships in the future.
So this indictment has really thrown a wrench in the gears. It'll be interesting to see how it all plays out. But what are your predictions? Do you think these charges will stick, or will the Adani Group find a way to come out of this okay?
That's the big question, isn't it? So too early to say for sure. A lot depends on how strong the prosecution's case is, Adani Group's legal strategy, and of course what evidence comes up during the investigation.
So we'll just have to wait and see. This story is far from over. I have a feeling we'll be hearing a lot more about it in the coming months.
I think you're right. This case has all the makings of a legal thriller: high stakes, powerful players, international intrigue, and a lot of mystery.
Speaking of mystery, I can't stop thinking about that lack of specifics in the indictment. It feels like there's so much we still don't know. What do you think? Will we ever get those missing pieces?
I think it's very likely. As the investigation goes on, I suspect we'll start to see a clearer picture of what happened, who was involved, and why they did it.
Well, until then, we'll just have to keep our detective hats on and stay tuned.
Absolutely. And remember, this deep dive has just scratched the surface. There's always more to uncover, more connections to make, and more to learn. So keep asking questions, stay curious, and don't be afraid to dig a little deeper.
Great advice. And as always, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back soon with another fascinating case, so make sure you subscribe and stay tuned. Until next time.
Yeah, it really makes you think. Makes you realize just how much goes on behind the scenes. But this lack of specifics in the indictment is still bugging me. Why do you think they chose to be so vague? Is there a legal strategy there?
Well, it's not uncommon for indictments to be somewhat vague, especially in complex cases like this. It allows the prosecution some flexibility as the investigation unfolds. They might not want to tip their hand too early and reveal all their evidence right away.
So it's kind of like a poker game. They're holding their cards close to their chest. Exactly. They want to keep the defense guessing. It can also make it harder for potential witnesses to coordinate their stories if they don't know exactly what the prosecution is focused on.
Makes sense. So this vagueness could be a way to protect the integrity of the investigation as well.
Definitely. It's about ensuring a fair trial for everyone involved.
Right. It's a reminder that this is just the beginning of a long process. A lot can happen between now and the time this case goes to court.
Absolutely. And we'll be here to follow every twist and turn.
Oh,
Okay, so before we wrap up, any final thoughts on what this case means for the Adani Group and for corporate accountability in general?
I think this case highlights the importance of transparency and ethical conduct for businesses, especially those operating on a global scale. The stakes are just too high to cut corners or play fast and loose with the rules. It's also a reminder that no one is above the law, no matter how wealthy or powerful they may be.
I completely agree, and I think it's going to be fascinating to see how this case plays out. It has the potential to set some important precedents for corporate accountability in the years to come.
Yeah.
Definitely one to watch.
Well, folks, that's it for this deep dive into the Adani Group indictment. We've covered a lot of ground today, but as always, this is just the tip of the iceberg.
There's always more to learn.
So keep digging, keep asking questions, and stay tuned for more deep dives coming soon. Until next time.